Previously on Rocket War.
As the Iraqis were pulling back, they were destroying oil wells and setting them on fire.
And all of a sudden, as we approached noon that day, the sky just started to get dark. And by 1 or 2 in the afternoon, it was like night.
Did see the glowing from the fires going northbound and coming southbound.
And that just created a plume of toxic air in the area. You couldn't hardly even see because it was so black.
You could smell it. You could taste it.
From Knockabout Media, I'm Ryan Barnett, and this is Rocket War. In our last episode, we traced Canada's ground war experience through the work of our field hospital, what it meant to prepare for chemical attack, to treat the wounded from both sides, and to confront the realities of a war that moved faster than anyone expected. This is episode 4, The Aftermath.
We start this edition of the International Hour with a look at one of the most disturbing and destructive aspects of the Persian Gulf War. Some 500 oil wells are burning out of control now, making Kuwait the scene of what scientists say is one of the worst man-made environmental and health disasters in history. Some Kuwaiti doctors say the only way for people to avoid potentially debilitating disease is to leave the newly liberated emirate.
The oil field fires were pretty significant, and it took almost a year, I believe, to get them out.
So the environmental contamination is quite profound.
But there was nothing the Canadians on the ground, in the air, or on the water could do about the oil smoke. The war ended on the morning of February 28, 1991, barely 4 days after the ground invasion started. It was time to go home. But as Major Jean Morin and Lieutenant Commander Richard Guillemette put it in their official history, the surprising end of the war did not slow down the pace of operations. It was simply redirected in the opposite direction. Members of the air campaign were well placed for a speedy return. Fighter pilot Paul Molnar, who had rotated home in mid-December and returned to combat in February, remembers that it cut his work short.
And, there had been a lot of other air-to-ground stuff going on. That was something that I was scheduled to do. I actually didn't do any of that. I woke up that morning and the ground war was over, type thing.
His friend David Deere remembers that his return home was almost instantaneous.
Pretty much within a day or two. I think we were there at the most 3 days. So it did all happen pretty fast.
I've never experienced such a fast redeployment.
This is Master Corporal Donald MacPherson, the communications system technician at Canada Dry 1.
We just packed things up, put a label on the side, said Comm Squadron Baden, and hoped it would appear someday. It was just leave it on the tarmac in a box on a pallet and see what happens.
The Naval Task Group, composed of HMCS Athabascan, Terra Nova, and Protector, had been away from home the longest. A visit from Defense Minister Bill McKnight marked their dismissal home. They left on the 12th of March. At the time, it was Major Jean Morin's job to compile the documents for the official record at the Canadian headquarters in Manama, Bahrain. It was also decided that he should interview as many veterans as possible. Jean decided to sail home with the ships so that he might interview the crew along the voyage, but they had already left.
And I had a lot of baggage that I had been carrying with me all along, including a big bag of classified papers that I could not keep away from my eyes, So the plan was that I would take a Hercules from Manama and I would go to Lahr in Germany. And from there, I was going to Gibraltar and I would get on board the ship at Gibraltar and then cross the Atlantic with them coming back to Halifax.
But that plan also fell through.
What happened is that when I got to Lahr, the plane that was going to go to Gibraltar was canceled.
Jean, an infantry officer by training, had plenty of experience dealing with sudden unexpected changes. He adapted.
So, from Lahr in Germany, I went to Frankfurt in train. I took a plane from Frankfurt to Malaga in Spain, then took a bus, went to Gibraltar.
However,
when I arrived in Gibraltar, the ships had already left.
Instead, Jean ran into another Canadian ship docked at Gibraltar.
I contacted them and they said, "We have a message for you. You are to take the plane now from Gibraltar. You are to go to London, and from London to go to Portugal, and from Portugal to go to the Azore Islands. Once you get to the Azore Island, you go to the control tower of the airport there, and you tell them in 2 days that the ships will be passing near the Azore Island."
One of the ships from the Naval Task Group would then radio the control tower as they passed.
"And they will say, 'Do you have a package for us?' And they are to answer, 'The Eagle has landed.'" And that's exactly what happened.
He had finally caught up with the ships. He could begin his interviews. But
And I first got to the ship that was the Protector, the big ship, and I started not to feel too well. And then they took me by helicopter to Athabaskan, the destroyer, and that's a warship, and that moved quite a bit. And then there was a storm, and I went to the smaller ship, Terra Nova, which was being banged left and right, and I was sick like a dog, trying to do my interviews throughout the crossing.
on April 7th, after weeks of sickening travel, Jean and the Naval Task Group arrived in Halifax. With their transatlantic voyage successfully completed, Jean had just a short flight home to Ottawa to complete his journey.
So I got into that plane, and I sat in my seat there, and then the attendant, the flight attendant came, and she spoke French. She said, "Bienvenue to Air Canada." And when she said, "Bienvenue to Air Canada," I was so tired, I was so completely empty that I started to cry like a baby. I was wiping my nose with the sleeve of my uniform. And I was, all of a sudden, I was decontracting, from all of that stress.
Both hospitals were full of casualties. So there was more surgeries to do, there was more cleanup to do, and we also had to find places for these people to go.
Chris Linford, Rebecca Patterson, Tim Courtney, and the rest of the field hospital staff stayed in the Gulf a little longer than the others. The hospital officially ceased operations on the 3rd of March, but there was still work to do. The wounded, after all, weren't miraculously healed at the war's conclusion. They spent the next 2 weeks arranging for their care. The wounded Iraqis couldn't just be handed over to anybody.
We had to hand them over to another competent medical provider, and that was hard to do because infrastructure of that nature in Iraq was not particularly plentiful, and some of the most injured folks simply passed away under our care. They would have required many more surgeries, and it just wasn't doable given the scenario.
In the days and weeks following the ceasefire, hospital staff could see the aftermath of the war up close.
They started pulling in captured Iraqi tanks. I remember going in one, and there certainly had been loss of life in that tank, and there's a very distinct odor when that's happened. But on the floor of the tank, looking at the auto-injectors that had been opened by those folks who, I guess, hadn't died on the initial attack, and then obviously used to try and treat themselves. And they were things like injectable Tylenol, for example, whereas of course we had things like morphine. What it does is it brings home the human cost of any war.
By the end of March, it was time for the demobilization of the field hospital. Chris Linford remembers that it was an Air Italia plane that came to fetch them in the desert.
Civilian flight attendants and civilian pilots, I think we were all pretty dirty and stinky at that point. We were able to have some drinks, which we had not really experienced the whole time we were there. Saudi Arabia is a dry country. A few people cutting loose, which was, I think, relatively healthy.
This is us flying home. Shine your boots. Just come off a war. Shine your boots. what else we have to do? Make sure everything's tied up, neaten yourself up, because you're going to be met by the Prime Minister. And I got to tell you, that was big. That was really big for us.
We were to land with CF-18s. I remember my cynicism rising just a touch. We were put into a circular holding pattern.
Keep it as miserable as possible.
And we're going to fly in circles until the politicians had got themselves all lined up.
But eventually they were cleared to land.
And it was lovely to land and see the outpouring of gratitude and happiness in the crowd. And the crowd was huge.
It was really big, from the bands to everybody greeting. And that's where my boyfriend and my best friend were able, as military people, to sit there and wait for us.
The Governor General was there wearing, in his Canadian Forces uniform, Prime Minister Maloney and his beautiful wife, and just Canadians from all over came. It was just terrific.
Chris's wife and new baby were also there. He remembers their presence, garnering them a bit of media attention.
They wanted to know if this was the first time I was seeing my baby, because that would be, the kind of story that would make it onto the news that night. And sadly, I had to inform them that I had met her for 2 days before I left. So that didn't get me onto the news that night.
In the aftermath, there were several homecoming events for returning service members. In those first days and weeks, meals were comped, parades were held, as well as flyovers.
We marched into Nathan Phillips Square, our Navy, Army, Air Force, and I remember how proud my mom and dad were. So even though my mom had been, I made her cry before I went, she was certainly very proud.
After all the welcome homes, it was back to life as usual. But the return to daily life was challenging for some.
In a deployment like that, you're working 7 days a week. If you get awakened in the middle of the night and spend 3 hours fixing a problem, you don't get to go to sleep the next morning and say, well, I'm taking 3 hours back for the time I worked. One day your stress is from trying to get a job done. The next day your stress is the Scuds have targeted us twice in the last 48 hours. As opposed to people back home on the base doing the regular routine, the same thing over and over. It's coffee break because it's 10 o'clock. It's lunch because it's 11:30. Stuff like this.
Some veterans had a hard time communicating their experiences. Air Force Loadmaster Claude St.Onge remembers returning to Quebec and learning that the minds of many Quebecers were on other things.
I remember coming back to Quebec, my last posting. It was just after the crisis in Oka, where they did the blockade and the Mercier Bridge. And I went to a bar and was talking to a guy I didn't know. He says, oh, well, he says, where are you from? Oh, I said, I just came back from the Gulf. I said, oh, you mean the Gulf in Oka there, where they did the... I said, no, the Gulf War in it.
And now you're back to people that just work the regular routine day to day, and they're going, well, it wasn't that hard for you over there or anything else.
And I've had it told me, well, you guys didn't lose anybody. So what's your problem?
Coalition ships had been hit by mines. They had been fired on by missiles. Coalition soldiers had been killed in combat and rocket attacks. Coalition planes were downed. Yes, the Canadians had sailed through minefields, fought off air attacks, and stitched the wounded back together, but they did so under the same looming threat. They accepted that they might die horrible deaths by drowning, gassing, or explosives. The same as all the other coalition forces.
It was still a friggin' war, right? You still got people shooting at you. You still got people trying to kill you. But we didn't lose anybody. We just were very fortunate.
And maybe no Canadian was killed in action, but it didn't mean the Gulf War didn't claim Canadian lives. In the decades that followed, a panoply of health issues has afflicted many returning veterans. Some of these issues have taken years to show themselves.
We meant everything to him as he did to us. And then in 2008, he started getting these headaches, which I never gave much thought to because, everyone gets a headache. But then his moods were changing.
This is Nathasha Mohr. Natasha's husband was Petty Officer First Class Richard Mohr, a sailor aboard the HMCS Athabascan.
So a couple days later, I get a call. he had taken a seizure on the ship. They did a CAT scan, and a tumor was picked up.
Richard was diagnosed with a stage 4 glioblastoma multiforme brain tumor. Nathasha remembers the oncologist asking Richard whether he was a firefighter.
And he said, well, I do firefighting because I'm in the military. And he said, we do regular exercises on the ship. And he said, why? And she said, well, because the firefighters have a pre-approved package should they get this type of brain tumor.
At that moment, Richard turned to Nathasha and said,
Hun, this is because of my service in the Gulf. And his oncologist asked him to elaborate.
Richard told her all about the oil smoke and the chemicals he had been exposed to.
And she said, yes. Yes, this is the cause.
Richard underwent surgery to have the tumor removed. And then
the cells had spread deeper into his brain, into his spine, into his back. There was nothing they could do. So I took him home. They didn't want me to take him home, but he wanted to go home.
On December 22nd.
It was sunny. It was gorgeous. It was the most beautiful day. But he's like trying to sit up, and he's reaching for me. And he's like, it's black, it's dark. And I said, oh yeah, that's because the power still went out from last night. Remember we had that snowstorm. And he goes, oh yeah, right. We lost the power. Well, he's blind. The tumor took his vision. So I don't know where I came up with that lie, but I somehow did.
Then on Christmas Day.
I got up about maybe 3 a.m. to give him his meds. And his heart had been fluttering all that day, and felt his heart, and his heart just kind of like reminded me of a butterfly, like just flutter, flutter, flutter. And then I kept my hand on his heart, and it stopped, and it never started. He passed.
Richard Mohr was 42 years old.
So I had to go get my kids and tell them. And we all said our goodbyes. Then the funeral director came, and we all went back to bed, and we all got up in the morning around 10, and the kids didn't want to open their gifts, but I said, Daddy would want you to open your gifts, so they did. Yeah. And at the funeral, my daughter delivered a lovely eulogy.
At the time, Veterans Affairs concluded that it was not enough evidence to consider Richard's tumor related to his service in the Gulf.
I had heard from Veterans Affairs one time, and this caseworker stated that if Rick's brain tumor was due to his service in the Gulf, it would have presented itself in the Gulf.
That decision meant Nathasha and her family were denied the recognition and benefits that would come with a service-related death.
The hoops, the hurdles, the pain, the agony that I had to go through to get a favorable outcome for my husband, I felt like it was going to do me in. People were telling me, stop fighting.
Nathasha argued her case for 9 years. The process was arduous and full of frustrations. A breakthrough came when she met Harold Davis and others who would support her case.
I want to say it was around 2015 Harold got the ball rolling for Rick to receive a favorable outcome from Veterans Affairs Canada. So not only Harold, but I also had Daryl Sampson, who was our MP. His assistant, Norman Doucette, helped me a lot. And he put me in contact with a Charles Duguay. He fought the board, and he won my case.
With Richard's death now ruled as service-related, Nathasha and her children were awarded the Memorial Cross. They were given the medal on Remembrance Day 2018, nearly 10 years after Richard's death.
Their father, my husband, died in service to Canada. And so it's very special for that reason. Rick was a very giving, kind person. So yeah, it's very special to have something good come out of his passing, because now the precedent has been set.
The Gulf War is largely a forgotten war here in Canada. It is often missing from war monuments, left out of curriculum and played down in military circles.
And it does mean a lot to the 4,200 veterans that served over there. Persian Gulf veterans in Canada, they just want the same respect as any old guy that served in a war.
In his role as president of the Persian Gulf Veterans of Canada, Harold feels that the veterans he represents don't receive the media coverage they deserve.
There's 3 books put out on Persian Gulf and 1 documentary, and we're still trying to get that documentary to be aired on national TV here in Canada. We can get it aired in the US. Go figure that one, right?
In recognition of their service, the Canadian government issued veterans the Gulf and Kuwait Medal, marking their deployment. Additionally, the governments of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, grateful for having been defended and liberated by the international community, issued all coalition veterans medals.
It was told to us at the time, you cannot wear the Saudi or Kuwaiti medal.
Prohibiting veterans from wearing foreign medals was a matter of policy. Military honors generally avoid recognizing the same service with multiple awards.
And no, it's not an operational medal. It's basically a thank you medal from a country that was invaded that we helped liberate, right?
And I said, well, I'm not wearing the Canadian one then. I don't really care about the Canadian one, to be honest. That medal to me means much less than the 2 that were awarded to us from the countries that we were there to help.
One thing that the Gulf War veterans community is trying to fight is the popular image of the damaged veteran. The idea that most veterans are broken pensioners, cast away and unable to help themselves. Those we interviewed for this series do not fit that description. Master Corporal Harold Davis spent 32 years in the Air Force.
And on the 25th anniversary, I was in Halifax. Not a thing was going on. It was like we didn't exist anymore. So I'm a loudmouth Newfoundlander. Right? It's just what it is. But I didn't fall off the cod truck the other day, and I still know how to read. So I was pissed that nobody was recognized in 25 years. And I turned around and I started making a few waves.
He founded the Persian Gulf Veterans of Canada Association.
Now we're working on the 35th anniversary in Halifax, which will be a 3-day event down there. All I can tell you is this: Veterans Affairs Commemoration Department, they really know their stuff and they really work hard behind the scenes to make sure it goes flawlessly.
Master Corporal Donald MacPherson left the military in 2000 after 20 years of service.
At present, I'm the national president of the Canadian Peacekeeping Veterans Association.
While in the Persian Gulf, Donald fell in love with travel. He never gave up on seeing the world. Captain Paul Molnar retired after an 11-year career with the Air Force, but he never gave up flying.
5 years after this conflict, I got out to start a business. So I've been involved in business, commercial aviation, military contracting for the last almost 30 years now. And now I'm at Bombardier as a production test pilot.
Lieutenant Colonel Chris Linford retired after a 33-year career in the military. He brought his experience in the Gulf on deployments to Rwanda and Afghanistan.
I'm currently working for Wounded Warriors Canada as a third-party contractor, trauma therapist.
Chris also has this message for listeners of this podcast.
I think it's important in this world today, when you look how the world is going and the danger level that is popping up all over the place. While movies are made often to glorify war, I can tell you there's no glorification there. It is nothing but the dirtiest job in the world when it comes down to it. And I believe Canadians and all people in the world need to understand that if we're going to go down that road, we best recognize that we are putting our youngest, our best, and brightest at a very high risk. And is it worth paying that price, is my question. I know it's a little bit, maybe a bit controversial, but so's war.
Vice Admiral Duncan Dusty Miller wrote a book about his experience in the Gulf called Persian Excursion. He is still involved in many aspects of the defense and veterans communities including the interviews we used here. Captain David Deere always enjoyed capturing moments and stories. He published a book about his squadron called Desert Cats. He retired after a 17-year career in the Air Force.
Well, after the military, I did end up with a couple of years with the Snowbirds, 94, 95, and then retired and continued with the air show for a year. I've now been with WestJet 26 years as a technical standards pilot, very much enjoying my role.
Rear Admiral Rebecca Patterson retired after a 34-year military career, which included deployments to Somalia and Afghanistan.
I am currently a senator for Ontario.
As a senator, she represents the Canadian government's sober second thought on matters of defense, NATO and UN collaboration, and Ukraine. Corporal Tim Courtney retired after a 12-year career with the Royal New Brunswick Regiment and the Royal Canadian Regiment.
Once I left the military, I pursued a career as a conservation officer. And on the side, I'm a professor over at Algonquin College.
In honor of Petty Officer First Class Richard Mohr and his 22-year career with the Royal Canadian Navy, Nathasha Mohr now does everything she can to support the Canadian Persian Gulf veterans.
I was a major in the infantry in the Canadian Forces.
Major Jean Morin retired after a 28-year career as an infantry officer with the Royal 22e Regiment and as a historical officer at the Department of History and Heritage. Jean co-wrote Operation Friction, the official history of Canada in the Gulf War, with Lieutenant Commander Richard Gimlett. He now volunteers with the Friends of the Canadian War Museum. Warrant Officer Claude St.Onge retired after a 25-year military career. His injuries sustained in the Gulf resulted in his eventual medical release. He initially had a hard time adapting to the outside world, particularly the lack of camaraderie, but found comfort in his Wendat heritage and in connecting with other veterans.
And I joined the Legion, where I become a service officer in the Legion, part of the head committee.
He now lives in Sherbrooke, Quebec, where he spends a lot of time on
my piece of land in the wood, where I get energy from the trees, the wind, the sun, and I'm better off today physically. And I live with my wife and my dog, and I enjoy life, and I don't regret 1 minute of my life.
This year marks the 35th anniversary of the Gulf War, and all parties want to see the conflict commemorated. Rocket War is an original production of Knockabout Media, written by William Patterson and hosted and produced by me, Ryan Barnett. This podcast was made possible thanks to funding from Veterans Affairs Canada's Commemorative Partnership Program. It features original interviews with Tim Courtney, Harold Davis, David Deere, Chris Linford, Donald MacPherson, Dr. Sean Maloney, Nathasha Mohr, Paul Molnar, Jean Morin, Claude St.Onge, and the Honorable Rebecca Patterson. Voice direction by Sonia Jamidi. Our series consultant is Jean Morin. If you enjoy this podcast, please rate and review, as it helps people find the show. If you're an educator and want to incorporate this series into your classroom, we have a list of discussion questions that can be found in the show notes or downloaded from our website at knockaboutmedia.com. There you'll also find our other shows, which include Among Equals, The Black Hum, Story Girl, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood North. Thanks for listening.
A Knockabout Media original. Hold on.